Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Realeyes The World Podcast. Today, we're returning with another installment to the Enlightening Series. And so, the topic for today is duality. And so, I'm sure a lot of us know about the word dual, but I don't think a lot of us know about the concept of duality. Um, for me, for example, I grew up all my life ignorant to this concept, and I only understood dual to go together as in a pair. Um, and so it's kind of obvious, like when you take positive and negative, um, love, hate, life, death, those are two pairs. But when you apply this, or not necessarily apply, but think of this concept of duality, um, it's really a whole different world. It opens your mind to some of the things that we're just fed as we grow up and never think to question it. This is how it is, and so this is what it is. This is what we understand it to be, and it's almost like it's a fact. No need to question it. But it is a bit of a hindrance to understanding the world when all you know is the concept of duality. Or I'm sorry, when you don't know of the concept of duality, and you live in the dualistic world as if that's all there is. But um it's again, it's something we're ignorant to until it's pointed out, or we somehow come across it, or you have an awakening and you start to see these things, you know so for me, for example, um when I had my awakening, when I started breaking out of this old mindset that I had, um I started to see that things aren't necessarily black and white. And if, for me, I was a very black and white person. And I quote my old self, which I said this multiple times throughout my life, but I used to say, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it right, and I'm going to give it my best, or I'm not going to do it at all. And so, the word right is subjective for one, in that, yeah, there may be procedures, but now with what I know, right is very subjective. There could be multiple paths to one end goal, and so who's to say what's right or wrong? But when I was ignorant to that, I could be assembling some furniture, or working on my car, and following a procedure, and I would follow it to the T. And if there was a gap in those procedures or instructions, it would kind of leave me stuck in the water, and I'd go out on the internet to find alternate procedures, or I couldn't think outside of the box, essentially, because I saw things as black and white. And so when it came to things that I didn't know how to do, or it was outside of my comfort zone to attempt to do, I wouldn't even do them at all. Because, again, black and white, why am I going to try something and potentially embarrass myself, or mess something up, or cause a loss of money, or have to spend more money because I didn't do it right? all these different things that could have went wrong. But I never stepped out of that comfort zone because, I just like my perception on doing things, that's how I carried out my life, and that I wouldn't do it if it wasn't me. And while there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, because we all live differently, but that living that way alone has made me miss a lot of opportunities. I could have found a new passion, tried something I might like, open a door to a new career. There's all kinds of things that I can't say for sure what would have happened, but we'll never know because the opportunity, the moment has passed. And when you're blind to stuff like that, it's like living in the dark. So anyway, let's talk about this concept of duality. And so what it essentially is an intentional separation of reality. It's the categorization or labeling of an event or a thing. And so that's to say, like I said, I saw things black and white. What I was essentially labeling there was, it's either this way or that way. There was no in between. There was no gray. Even though in art, you can take the color palette, mix black and white, and what do you get? You get a new color. You get gray. And to take that even a step further, which I just hesitated, but you can get infinite shades of gray as well. So that's to say, when you stop looking at things as black and white, there are infinite possibilities of how you can perceive things. But this intentional separation of reality, this is something I believe we're taught as we're growing up, with the simplest form of good versus bad. We see that when we're trying to raise kids, or we're being raised ourselves. We're teaching them, hey, don't do that. That's bad. That's bad behavior. Or it might not necessarily be bad behavior because that's subjective. But we could take that a step higher to label it not socially acceptable. You don't go out in public and throw a fit, because that hinders other people's experiences. So we label that as unacceptable behavior. But in reality, and I say reality as in, what things really are, what happens to other people around that experience of a child throwing a fit in public, is really irrelevant. You have a relationship with that child, and so perhaps he's throwing a fit because he or she is throwing a fit because they're in need of something. If they can't communicate, as in being a baby, then that's the only way they can tell you, hey, change me, or I'm hungry, etc. But when we get caught up in this world of duality, then we bring in that opinion, that subjective opinion of what's socially acceptable versus what's not, or what's good versus bad. And then we start to impose that on reality, whether it's on another human being, or whether it's the outcome of an event. For example, you took a test and you might have failed it, and you start labeling that bad because that's unacceptable. But you don't know the consequences of failing that test immediately. That failing that test could cause you to, whether we're talking about in school, it could cause you to change your major or whatever you're studying, and lead into better things into your life. or the timing's not appropriate. Yeah, if you're in the medical field, um, failing a test necessarily means that you're not ready to apply these practices to actual people. Um, and so, if you were to think worst case scenario, maybe you paid a teacher off in this hypothetical world, and they pass you, and you go out and you practice whatever healthcare this example is consisting of, and you hurt somebody or cause a fatality. Now you're in a bad spot. But that's to say, at the time something happens, whether we call it good or bad, is only playing into that world of duality where we really don't even know what's the outcome's going to be down the road. Other things that we judge or label, positive and negative. And that's not in the polar scientific terms, so to say, because, labeling something like magnetically positive or negative is a characteristic. But just like I said earlier, behavior-wise or whatever we want to label an event, good or bad, that's a positive event, that's a negative event. Those two opposites fall in the same realm of duality. Success and failure, love and hate, life and death. If you look at life as just life and death, you miss the whole in between. When we think about life as birth and then death as death, what's the in between? Why are we labeling life and death when there's a whole, however many years you may live or somebody may live, there's a hole in between there. And that hole in between is what we call life. Now, let's take this a step further. When you look at an art picture, whether it's the Mona Lisa, a meme, something artistically created, we look at that entire picture. And so that entire picture consists of a background and a foreground, right? And whatever is in the foreground, we can't differentiate it from the background without looking at the outline, right? And so looking at the outline of whatever the image may be of the foreground, that's how we, let's take a character, the Mona Lisa. Let's just use the Mona Lisa since that's immediately in my head. We look at the outline of the person in that picture and we say, okay, this is the Mona Lisa. That's the foreground. We, for whatever, and it's not for whatever reason, but for reasons why our mind works like this, we ignore the background. I think most of us would agree that to some extent, without looking at the picture, and if we're not in the art field, that we know that the background is somewhat dark and hazy. It's not really a focal point to the picture, but we ignore the background. And so when you think of the concept of duality and a picture, the foreground plus the background equals a picture. Now, when you think of an artist, do you think the artist is just thinking about the foreground when they paint the picture? No, they have to take the background into account. They have to fill that background with something. It could be white space, but the people who use white space artistically to their advantage are very good at it. I mean, I don't know of any artists offhand, but you don't normally see pictures with a lot of white space unless it's really well done. But I say all this because in the example of life or birth and death, foreground, background, life versus a picture, which the picture includes everything, life includes everything. You see how we miss out the in between when we start to classify, or in the case of our pictures, or I'm sorry, when we look at pictures, we kind of ignore the background. That's to say, with life and death, or birth and death, we kind of ignore death and we focus on birth. We celebrate birth, right? But when death comes, it's a whole different world. We treat it as, something bad. And yes, it's a change. It's a major change for the people affected. But how do we even know birth is any different from death, other than on a physical plane? We don't know where the conscious goes, and you might have different religious beliefs, or your own beliefs of what happens when you die. But the fact is, on this physical world, none of us can necessarily say what happens. We don't know if we're reborn, or if you go to a heaven or hell, or if you just blank out and that's the end of your existence. We can't say. But with duality, when you look at life as a whole, you look at a picture as a whole, you take it for what it is. You don't judge it. You don't put a label on it. And when you don't do that, it's essentially one. That's this to take this another step further, with nature. We're raised, and our education systems, at least in America, teach us that we're separate from nature. We are different from animals. We are different from the world that happens out there. But the fact is, we are born out of this world. And yes, we're born from another human, our mothers. But in the big picture, humans came out of nature. They came out of the earth. Everything's evolved to this point where we are in time, where if we really wanted to connect dots and draw a story to it, we don't exist without the earth. And, if you want to talk about our origins, we are from nature. But we're not taught this. We're taught to think of everything in a, and I air quote, logical sense, and ignore, the whole picture. Ignore the whole story and just focus on the birth and the death part. This is what I'm going to do in my lifetime. And I have to apologize, guys. The weather is awesome today, and I live by a highway. I can't do anything about all these bikes speeding down the highway right now. But it's good energy vibing out there. It's a sunny day today. But anyway, not to go off topic. But yeah, we come from the earth. And the totality of everything, we can take that even a step further, that we come from the universe. Because through some cosmic collision, the earth was created. And everything down the road's created, which brings you and I here. But we don't look at it like that. We look at it as, okay, this is my lifetime. This is what I'm doing during my life. This is my purpose in life. We ignore that bigger divine picture of we are only here at this point in time because of the sequence of events. And then we take that a step further to think that we are in control of things, when in fact an asteroid could blow this planet up at any second. Now, being the intelligent creatures that we are, we would probably have a heads up, a warning that that's coming. But had we not progressed, so far into technology, we could be in the early 1900s, and yes, an asteroid could obliterate the planet at any moment. Yet here we are in this small sliver of time, because remember, the universe is going to go on with or without us, with or without the planet, with or without half of the stuff in it, because I can't necessarily say life goes on, but the universe goes on. But with our labeling of everything, we miss that, and we live our life in the precise moment of our time, and caught up in this incessant labeling or judging of things when we really don't know. I use the medical example, and the failing the test or passing the test. We don't necessarily know the consequences of that event going down the road. We know the immediate result. Oh, I passed. Oh, I failed. That's all it is. Whether it's a good or bad thing on both ends, pass or fail, we really don't know. You're, and to even try to label it good or bad, you still play into that world of duality. Like I said, if you end up getting a malpractice lawsuit because you paid the teacher off to pass, we can't even necessarily call that good or bad. But it's something in our minds, which I do believe it begins early, and it's passed down generationally, and not just in our education systems, that we teach each other to label things, to live in a world of good and bad, evil, and I guess heroism. And the world is not like that. Like I said with the paint, with the black and white. Once you start mixing black and white together, there are infinite numbers of shades of gray that you can get. We could simplify it to call it gray, whatever shade it is. And if we're going to do that, we can just say that's the totality of things. But if you break it down to the infinite number of shades of gray that there possibly are, that's also the infinite number of possible realities that you could have. The possible number of totalities. The possible number of lives. Not just the birth and the death part, but how you make your life out to be. And if you can see past this this concept of duality, you can start to remove barriers from your life. Like I said with the black and white, I would either do something 100% or not do it at all. But since I've had my awakening, I've tried a lot of new things that I would have never done before. And, here I am now recording a podcast. Who knows where I'd have been had I not tried some of these different things. I didn't think I'm somebody worth listening to. But yet I've given it a try, and I continue to do so through this podcast. And whether people listen or not, whether I go viral or not, whether I get a couple views or 100 or none, is what it is. I'm not here labeling it. I'm not here putting it in a dualistic view of, oh, this is bad, I should stop, or this is good, I should keep going, or whatever I might think of the good and bad. I just do it, and I do it because, yeah, I guess we could say I feel passionate about it. This whole newfound perspective on life for me is something I want to share. And might I not be heard in my lifetime? I could be heard 100 years from now. I don't know. I don't know that will happen. And I'm not going to rule it out. And, that's not saying on the bright side or hoping for the best, because those also play into the dualistic view. On the bright side means there's a dark side. Hoping for the best means there's also I guess failure. What's the opposite of hope? Hope versus something not happening. So anyways, not to make this about me, but if you see my approach there, just removing that whole concept of duality and just doing what you want to do, doing what makes you happy or what makes you feel good in the moment, is seeing things as one. Ultimately, we are our own creators of our reality. And if you put things in two categories, you limit yourself to those two categories. If you look at everything as one, then there's infinite, like I said with the shades of gray, there's infinite possibilities of what can be within that one. And so, yeah, I that kind of covered everything I had written down here. Had a couple more examples I thought were interesting, and I have to give some credit to Alan Watts for some of these examples, like the art picture, the background and the foreground. In music, what we call music, we we wouldn't know what music was unless there's a pause in between each music note. And that's however brief that pause is, whether it's changing to a new note or if it's replaying the same note rhythmically. We would not be able to distinguish a rhythm or a beat or music in general without those pauses. And so when you're looking at things dualistically, there's sound and no sound, right? But when you look at music in its totality, those pauses actually make up the music as well. But again, the way our minds are conditioned, we're only looking out for the noise because the noise breaks the silence. And for us, that is something that gets our attention. So when we're in that dualistic mindset, essentially I want to say in addition to our survival instincts, we look out for noise breaking the silence. And so, you put that together with music, and what do? We only focus on the drum, we only focus on the guitar, whatever the instrument is playing. And when the music artist is done, we have a whole song. And yeah, there's overlap, and you might not hear the different pauses and sound because, there's guitars and drums and whatever playing at the same time. But the totality of it makes a song. Those pauses make the song. If you can't comprehend that one, here's another one, and this is for just writing or reading in general. If we didn't put spaces in between our words, we would have long strings of letters. And it'd be very hard to make out what people are trying to say or write. And it'd be like decoding, and I'm sure as humans we would have came up with a different way to make communication more efficient. But just take our existing system with the use of spaces. Those spaces in between each word makes it some form of literature, whether you're reading a book or an article or something on Facebook. We only know that there are distinct words because we put spaces in between each word. But we don't necessarily look at the spaces because whatever it is we're looking at, and this is similar to, the artists, whatever it is we're looking at, we're looking for what pops out of the white space or whatever, you're reading off of. If you're reading off a white screen, we're looking for the black ink, white space, black ink, white space for the different words. And again, this is something in our minds where we're conditioned, or it may be instinctive, that we dualistically observe and ignore the not important part. The black and white here. We're only looking for the black text. We're ignoring the white because we're looking for words. We're trying to read. We're trying to make out what the message is. But if you look at it in its totality, the ink plus the white space on the paper make up the literature. Just like the music plus the pauses, the silence in between music notes make up the song. And so that's not to necessarily say living in duality is a bad thing, or it's something we shouldn't do. But when you play in duality, you need to have this understanding. That way you don't base your entire life or your entire mindset off of this way of thinking. This is something, like, for me, like I said, I live by that black and white mentality. I'm either going to do it full effort or I'm not going to do it at all. And again, living that way, I've missed out on who knows what. Closed doors, doors that were opened and I said no, things like that. Just passing up opportunities and experiences. Just with that dualistic view, and a lot of things added up to why I did that. Having pride, having, whatever I'm going to do with my name associated on it, it's got to be perfect. Fear of failure. If I can't do it 100%, I don't want to do it at all because I don't want to fail at it. I don't know if there's other emotions involved in it, but those are the two that come to mind. But now, I look at things as one. Even if I had goals for the day and they get skewed off track somehow, I go with the flow. It's not like, oh, now I can't do my goals because then there's do and don't do. Because life is always going to throw you curveballs or unexpected stuff. And again, this is how you find opportunities. This is how you open new doors. You get new experiences. By not shutting out, okay, this is my plan. This is not part of my plan. I'm going to do what's with my plan. No, if you're living in the present moment, then you do what you feel you should. But again, remove the dualistic view of, okay, this is my plan, this is not my plan. Be open-minded. Okay, if I do this and I don't do my plan, don't necessarily weigh gains versus losses, because that's also duality, but weigh how you feel about it. Oh, I gotta do all this work so I can get ahead for next week, or I can go spend time with my family and go biking or something. What do you think you're gonna get the most out of? And and really, it's not even what do you think, because this plays into the realm of following your intuition, your gut instincts. Because once you start thinking, is when you start bringing in this stuff that we were raised to think, or how we were raised to think. Your gut instinct might say, go biking with the family. But then you start weighing in, oh, but I have a job, I have responsibilities, or I really need to get ahead because if I don't, I'll fall behind. And you start weighing in all this irrelevant stuff to the present moment. And that's not to say always, play before work, but there's an appropriate time for play and there's an appropriate time for work. And it's up to you to follow your instincts in that present moment to make that call. If you say no to playing right off the bat without thinking, that's usually your gut instinct. And, you may have work on your mind. You may be very concentrated in doing something, and that's fine. But you don't, and this is another step, you don't go further to rethink your decision afterwards, because that's how you start forming regret. Once you start second guessing yourself, oh, did I make the decision? Did I make the right decision? Then you're playing into that concept of duality again, right versus wrong. And so, my advice there would be to take a breath. Take a breath. If you start feeling, for some reason buyer's remorse came to mind just now. Oh, I shouldn't have bought that car. Oh, I shouldn't have bought this. Just take a breath. Find the breath. This is where meditation comes in for me. Find that autonomous breath that runs without you. Focus on that breath and understand that is life right there in a nutshell, without all the extra thinking, without the regrets, without the anxiety. Did I do the right thing? Oh, I should have did this. No. Be present in every moment. Be aware of playing in the world of duality, and live your life with what you feel is right at the moment. And again, right or wrong, duality, but there's a feeling in you that tells you this is what you want to do. This is what you're going to do. Before you start weighing in with your subconscious opinions or our conditioned thinking. So I think we'll leave it at that. I'd like to engage the listeners. If you guys are listening, made it to this far, whether you found this on YouTube or on one of the multiple outlets that this podcast is available on, leave a comment or send me a message. What are some of the concepts of duality you guys experience or are aware of? And a lot of this stuff we play in without even knowing. So yeah, if you're aware of it, or if I got your mind thinking to where you're realizing some stuff, feel free to comment. Let me know. Let everybody else know. Or if you have questions about it, let's talk about it. Let's get a discussion going. All right, guys. So thank you for listening. We'll be back every Friday until further notice. recording additional episodes, whether it's to the Enlightening Series or to whatever. I'm gonna keep this going. Remember to, like or subscribe or whatever media outlet you're on, if it has any options. Those statistics count. I recently learned, they also count for algorithms and, suggesting videos to other people based on your preferences. So please use those available buttons on whatever media outlet you're on, whether it's, again, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify. All of that helps out. And, if you're interested in this type of stuff, the more viewers we can get, the more minds we can throw in the melting pot to discuss this type of stuff. All right, guys. So thank you again, and we'll catch you on the next one.